Would you pray with me, please? God of grace, God of hope. During those times when we are frightened, when we are uncertain, meet us, restore us, lift us up, and bless us. Amen. So the scene opens just prior to this morning's passage. Jesus and his disciples have fed the 5,000. This incredible miracle. And he has sent the disciples across the Sea of Galilee so that they might prepare the way for him to come and bring about more teaching and healing. And the crowds know that that's where the disciples are going, so they go to the other side of the lake, the sea, as well. And as they're in the boat, Jesus goes up to a mountaintop to pray, to restore himself, to refresh himself for the next calling, the next challenge. And while he is there, he sees the boat beginning to be tossed. The Sea of Galilee is a shallow sea, a shallow lake body of water. And when the winds come along, because it's such a shallow body of water, it can go from being very calm to being very stormy and very treacherous in a matter of just moments. And so Jesus looks across at the sea from his mountain vista, and he sees that his disciples are struggling. Verse 24 and 26. The disciples in the boat were battered by the waves. They were far from land, and the wind was against them. And early in the morning, he came walking towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. Before we get into the story itself about being tossed upon the sea, I'd like to say some words about the disciples that he is going to rescue, that he is going to attend to. What do we mean by a disciple? At the time of Jesus, disciples was another term for students. And any child between age 6 of 10 were required to go to school. And they would memorize the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that which our Jewish sisters and brothers call the Torah. 5 days a week, a child aged 6 to 10 would go to school. And the word for that school is Bet Sephora. And Bet is a word for place of study. A Bet Sephora. So every child would go to school. And then at age 10, school was over for 95% of the kids. They would go and they would learn a craft. They might become a carpenter or a farmer or a craftsperson or a fisherman. And they would be mentored, apprenticed to someone in their family or to someone in their village. So school was out after age 10. Can I have a woohoo for kids today? When I was 10, I dreamt about that. But if you were a student of promise, a small percentage of the students from age 10 to 14 would go on to another level of education, and that was called Bet Talmud. And it was a place where it was more rigorous study, and you would memorize all of the Hebrew scriptures. Memorize them, and then you would be versed in what is called questions and answers, where you would, under the tutelage of a rabbi, you would learn how to go deeper in asking questions about the text in community with others. It's like an intensive Bible study from age 10 to 14. And then for most of the students, that was the end of your education at age 14. And then you would go and you would be apprenticed to become a farmer or a craftsperson or a fisherman or whatever livelihood was available to you in the village. But for the best of the best of the best, this small fraction A rabbi would see something promising in a young person in that village, age 14 and 15. And that rabbi would go and would grill that student. And then, if that student were lucky and passed the test of the rabbi, that rabbi might choose that student to become his disciple for life. And the task of that disciple was to learn to walk in the footsteps of the rabbi, to learn to live and love like that rabbi, to accumulate all of the wealth, this little subset of disciples, the best of the best of the best. And there was a saying that the disciple walked so closely in the footsteps of the rabbi that the dust of the rabbi covered the disciple. And so a blessing of that time was, may the dust of your rabbi cover you. May the wisdom of your rabbi cover you. This small subset, the best of the best, the brightest of the brightest, were called to be discipled to the rabbi. But Jesus chose his disciples not according to the qualifications of the time. He saw things in others that others didn't see. He saw wisdom in the fishermen and in the carpenters and in those with seemingly a lack of education. He saw the potential in others that others didn't see. And so it was this group of unlikely ones, not the elite class, not the best and the brightest, but the unlikely ones. James and Andrew and John, they were fishermen. They were apprenticed to their dad, Zebedee. So when the disciples were called, these were young people, maybe 15 or 16 years of age, still in apprenticeship to learn how to be fishermen that Jesus chose. It's not people of great stature in the eyes of their community, but great stature only in the eyes of Jesus. It's been said, argue for your limitations long enough, and sure enough, they're yours. Society had placed limitations on the vast majority of peoples in their community. And they said, this is all you're capable of. This is the task for the rest of your life. But Jesus always argued for the potential in others. And so it was this unlikely group who were out on the boat trying to get from point A to point B when the storm came up. These were the disciples, this collection of carpenters and fishermen and craftspeople that Jesus had chosen to be his followers, to learn how to walk in his footsteps because he believed in them. Verse 27 through 28. Immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. Peter is saying, if you think I can do it, Jesus, I'll do it. Because I see you walking on the water, and my role as a disciple is to learn to do what you're doing. Can I do it? It seems impossible. It scares me to death. It frightens me. And Jesus said, "Come." And he began to walk. Verse 30, we pick up the story. But when Peter noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" You of little faith, why did you doubt? Really what Jesus is saying to Peter, why did you doubt yourself? Why did you doubt what I see in you? Peter, why are you arguing for your limitations when all I see is your potential, is your giftedness right here, right now? Peter, you have the capability to even walk on water like I do. Why can't you see yourself, Peter, through my eyes? Imagine what happens when you and I have such faith in ourselves, to see ourselves as called and equipped and blessed and gifted, because that's what Jesus sees in us. The disciples, John Shea, the writer, calls the disciples Jesus and the 12 clunkers. I mean, think about them. They fought amongst themselves. Peter denied that he even knew Jesus at one point. Thomas doubted. These were imperfect people, yet Jesus saw the perfect within them. He saw their giftedness and their courage and their wisdom, and he always was trying to draw it out in them and seeks to draw it out in you and in me. Jesus isn't saying we're to be arrogant, like, look at me, look at my capability, but to believe in ourselves and to stop arguing for our limitations. Do we believe that to be true? Do we believe that to be true? As Julie was saying, last Sunday we had an awesome farewell celebration for Beth. And when we sat down with Beth yesterday to kind of just unpack Sunday, she was just so grateful for the love and support of this community. And one of the things that we talked about, and just hearing conversations informally afterwards and leading up to Beth's wonderful farewell party, was a sense of that there's a sense of dislocation for a lot of us, a sense of unease. For a lot of people, Beth has been the constant pastoral presence for 30 years. In the midst of all the changes that this congregation has gone through, Beth has been that point of continuity, that anchor. And when that relationship changes, it can create a real sense of dislocation, a sense of dis-ease for many of us. And that is normal and that is natural, and we need to feel whatever we are feeling. And maybe it gives us a sense of what those disciples were feeling in the boat, dislocated, out of their element, afraid of being capsized and tossed into the water, and wondering what their future would hold. A reminder that Jesus comes and reaches out to the disciples then and disciples today, reminding us that we are not alone, that we have all of the gifts within us to be faithful followers, and that he will walk alongside us and even carry us when we feel most unsettled. Jesus comes alongside because he has chosen the disciples then, and he's chosen disciples like you and me to walk with him, to even walk on water. He calls us individually and collectively as a church to not argue for our limitations, to believe that Jesus is faithful to us and is with us. Jesus said to his disciples in another part of the gospel, "You will do even greater things than me." Does that kind of blow your mind? It must have blown the minds of the disciples then. You, Peter and Thomas and James and John and Mary and the other disciples and Joanna, you will do even greater things than me through the power of God at work in you. And he said to them, do you believe that to be true? And he says that to us today. Do we believe that to be true? Jesus said something even more. Go and make disciples of all nations. Become a mentor to others in the faith, because you, First Baptist in Beverly, we collectively, individually and collectively, have all the gifts and the talents. Just imagine. Jesus was saying to the disciples then and to disciples today, within you are all the tools to offer generosity and forgiveness and blessing and justice and inclusion and compassion and hope and healing. It's within each of our toolboxes to offer those gifts. Do we believe that to be true? Rob Bell, the theologian, offers this blessing. May you believe in God, but also may you believe that God believes in you. May you believe in God, but may we also believe that God believes in us. In the midst of the storms of life, maybe a difficult diagnosis, maybe a loved one who has moved to another part of the country, maybe one of our kids has relocated somewhere, maybe there's been a divorce, maybe there's been a change in our work setting. Whatever uncertainties you're dealing with or I'm dealing with, Jesus comes and reaches out his hand, embraces us and comforts us, and encourages us to go and be his followers. This is the good news. Thanks be to God. And may God's people say, amen.